Hey everybody, what up? All right, so I think it's over for a lot of the vibe coders, honestly. Like what we're seeing now is we're seeing all the providers that have given vibe coders all the hope in the world to build the next Google or whatever startup they're trying to build. They're quickly finding out that they can't support those vibe coders, and vibe coders are quickly finding out that they can't afford to pay for these products that the products themselves cannot afford to provide. So we have a big problem. An example of that is that Cursor Anthropic just recently changed their price model. They're actually saying that they're rolling out these weekly rate limits on Claude Pro and Max. So everybody that's like, oh, use Claude Code, blah, 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 don't use Cursor and all this. Well, you're going to run into the same problems. They're actually saying that they're going to be implementing these because of 5%. They said less than 5% of their subscribers are actually causing what they consider to be like, a large amount of quota, right? They're using up way more than Cursor or Claude has anticipated. And in this case, Claude is saying, like, because of those 5% of users, we're going to go ahead and penalize the other 95%. The bottom line is you can equate this to simply Claude is burning through way too much money. And when I say Claude, really Anthropic is the company that owns them. They're burning through way too much cash. And just like Cursor, they're having to raise their prices and implement quotas. And it really sucks, honestly. So Cursor, I did a video on this a couple weeks ago, but Cursor's already in hot water because I think anybody that's used Cursor were like already very accustomed to it. Like we kind of need it. And we've created this world where like if you do not use these tools, then some junior out there is going to be able to outcode you who uses these tools. But I've also said all along, and I believe this more than ever, using these tools extensively over the last couple of years, if you don't know how to code, you're going to create a humongous pile of shit. If it's of any complexity, that's going to happen. Even if you've been coding for a long time, you're going to see that these tools, it doesn't matter if it's GPT-5 that just came out or whatever, they are going to code their way into a hole. They're going to implement hacks. It's going to be like commenting out code instead of like fixing tests, or like it's crazy what some of this stuff does, and it can be very subtle. And if you're not an experienced developer, like you're going to be in trouble. And I think that's what actually these vibe coders are seeing. They're like addicted to it, like they're addicted to crack. It's like, and I get it. Like I've been that developer when I was learning how to do this early on in my career, and you have these aha moments, and you're like, oh, but you start feeling more and more powerful the more things that you figure out, and as your project starts to come to life, that gives the vibe coders the same sensation, but they're having to pay out the nose for it, and it's not going to get any cheaper. It's going to get way more expensive. So that said, we're now going to have a bunch of different IDEs. I also said this in the past that the IDE to win the game, I don't actually know who it's going to be at this point. I think everybody's going to try to roll their own. I just saw the other day that Claude could be implemented into like Emacs and all this, and Vim. So I think what we're going to see is pretty much everybody and their mother is going to try to create their own IDE. And we're already seeing that. Like here's an example of Kilo Code. This is a Visual Studio extension though. So one of the things that Cursor did is they actually forked the entire Visual Studio Code project, and creating that divergent path is pretty massive, right? But it gives them absolute control over the core of how Visual Studio Code works. And if you're running an extension in Visual Studio Code, you have to abide by all types of different rules. It's essentially an iframe, and there's only a certain amount of ways that you can interact with the core API that Visual Studio Code provides. So all that being said, I have a video coming out here pretty soon that shows you how quickly you can create one of these tools as an extension. But you'll find that everybody and their mother is going to go out and try to do that, but it's going to be very limited in the abilities that it has when you compare it to something like Cursor, which is a true fork. Now, the true fork of something like Cursor is that they've now diverged all the way back to when they did it, right? So they're not actually getting Visual Studio Code's latest updates, whether it's security updates or whatever it might be, not without doing manual intervention and merging those latest changes into their own code base, which I'm sure has diverged quite a bit. And I would imagine that the conflicts are probably numerous. So this is an example. We have Kilo Code, which is an extension, and I saw this advertised. That's why I had it pulled up. It was just on Google advertising. It's like, and then you have, that's not to be confused with Kiro, which just came out from Amazon. Again, everybody and their mother is going to be trying to create an IDE right now because they saw Cursor go from 0 to 10 billion. But here's the name of the game. You have Cursor now struggling with all the different providers that people want to use. And really, it comes down to large cloud providers. They control everything. So you got OpenAI, Google Gemini, and then you got Claude, right, with Anthropic. And those are like the three main ones. And then, there are other products out there like Grok or whatever. But the point being is that Cursor is able to have deals with these companies to buy massive amounts of resources. And then they were charging $20 a month to get people in. And it seemed like it was unlimited and all this. And the bottom line is that Cursor has hundreds of millions of dollars in funding, and they can afford to burn through a bunch of cash in order to acquire customers. But we're already seeing that they're burning through too much cash too quickly, just like Anthropic, and that's why they've raised their prices. So the name of the game, though, for all the people that are going to custom roll their own IDE, I get it. Like, I could do that as well. Like, anybody can do that. Maybe not anybody, but anybody with decent programming experience can do that. But the problem you're going to have is that you're not going to have hundreds of millions in venture capital funding to be able to buy bulk resources from companies like OpenAI. And you're going to be forced to do something like bring your own key, which is not something unique. That's something that probably the direction that we need to go. So none of us are relying on Cursor or any other IDE. It's going to have to be bring your own key. And the way that that's going to succeed is because a company like Cursor, they are interfacing to all these different providers, but they're charging way too much. So if you end up having an IDE that has like basically no overhead and you bring your own key, there's not going to be any way for like Anthropic or OpenAI or whatever to throttle an individual user based on the IDE that they're using. And what I mean by that, this is the first article that popped up, but basically Anthropic refuses to support Windsurf. So Windsurf was the other big editor in addition to Cursor. Everybody was like, oh, it's better than whatever. The bottom line, though, is that Anthropic was like, hey, Windsurf, we're not going to allow you to use our latest models, right? So they were able to hamstring anybody that uses Windsurf, because then if you weren't able to use the latest versions of Claude, you clearly wouldn't want to use Windsurf and you would go to like Cursor or something like that. So the bottom line, there's a lot of politics and backstabbing and everything going on. And here's an example of Hacker News article where Windsurf's deal to be bought, it was off, and then the Windsurf CEO went off to Google. So there's just madness going on in the industry right now. There's no clear front runner, and Cursor is probably not going to be what we're going to see in the long term. I mean, this reminds me of the early advent of the internet, where you had all these different search engines, right? Like Ask Jeeves or Yahoo with all its ads and a tiny little search bar in the middle of it. And then finally Google came along, but that was like 15 years later. I think we're seeing something similar to this in the IDE market. So everybody, all the large companies, small companies, everybody's trying to create their own editor. And what we're going to see 5 years from now is probably not going to be anything like what we're seeing right now. And I do think that if I had to make a prediction on it, it's going to be an open source solution that can interface to these different APIs. That's ultimately where we're headed. There's no reason why we can't have an open source Cursor with using our own keys. And again, the companies, they can still throttle you because they've throttled you all along. They've always had throttling terms of use, but they're going to have a much harder time being like, oh, because you use this product like Cursor or Windsurf or whatever, screw you, you're not using the latest thing. They're not going to deny people that ability to use their AI. And if they do, then we'll just go to another one. So thank goodness, though, for the Chinese, because they seem to be working very, very difficult, very hard on being able to create a local LLM. So a lot of people that talk about, well, I'm just going to use my own local LLM to be my own vibe coder or whatever. Good luck. They don't work the same way as the cloud providers. They're not nearly as efficient. They can't accept as many tokens. They're too slow. Most people don't have a good enough graphics card to even run even a halfway decent model. So rolling your own LLM locally isn't going to make a lot of sense unless it's for some very, very basic tasks. So for all the people that say that, I don't really understand. I don't know of any local LLM that is going to be able to pull that off. So yeah, the bottom line is that everybody's been duped. You've now been addicted to these products, so you sort of feel like you need to have. They do save a lot of time if you're effective in the way that you manage these things, especially if you use Git to sort of back up almost every iterative change that these things do, because they'll go off the rails real quickly. If you're able to do that, then clearly you're going to be more proficient than if you didn't have these tools. But now we're at a stage where we're having to compete with vibe coders, man, and vibe coders are willing to burn their cash to make their little products and everything. And a senior developer, whether you're working for a company or for yourself, you're going to have to buy these tools. And I don't think Windsurf or Cursor or any of those things are long-term viable options to be able to do this. And I'll end things on this note. I do actually foresee a situation where right now companies are offshoring, they're laying off, they're blaming AI specifically for being able to cut jobs and all this, and all that's well and good, but we should be working our best to put these companies out of business if that's what's necessary. And that's actually what's going to end up happening. A lot of companies that have a competitive advantage because they have some sort of product, whether it's like, video editing software or something like that. If everybody gets good at coding and vibe coding continues to get better and things like that, you're going to have relatively proficient developers be able to do one-man operations and build competing products to companies that are worth tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. And maybe you won't be the next Microsoft or something like that, but there are plenty of opportunities to dig into the market share of a lot of small and medium-sized companies that provide software or software as a service. They might be cutting jobs right now, but they're also going to be on the chopping block one day when pretty much any proficient developer that has a chip on their shoulder because they got laid off or whatever, they're going to build a competing product and you're going to have way more competition. And I think maybe at that point we'll then start seeing more job growth because there's just going to be way more small business startup opportunities. So anyway, I also want to mention that the prediction that I had last month about the tax changes in regards to, that got introduced on July 4th in the United States, they're very beneficial to startups, and just my own personal experience, I've actually seen a large increase in the amount of recruiters picking up here. So hopefully that's a good sign for the future. I know that we still have a terrible job market, but it is interesting that it seemed like for years all the recruiters dried up and they seem to be coming out of the woodwork again. All right, everybody, check out my video game, King Crab VR. Created it over a 2-year period of time, a little side project. I'm glad I pulled it off. It's going to be releasing in basically November. And I haven't put an official date on that, but anyway, that's the plan here. So it's pretty much done. Then also check out my website if you're interested, codehawk.com, and I have just more information and things in regards to what I do there. So everybody have a good day. Talk to you soon. Bye.